November 12, 2005, started like any other day in the quiet neighborhood of East Lansing, Michigan. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves painted the streets in shades of orange and gold. But behind the calm appearance, a chilling mystery lay dormant, one that would not see resolution for nearly a decade. Sarah Mitchell, a 24-year-old administrative assistant, had vanished without a trace from her apartment complex on the west side of the city. Her friends and family were frantic, calling hospitals, checking shelters, and hopping for some sign of her safety. The initial response by the East Lansing Police Department was immediate. Officers canvassed the area, spoke to neighbors, and reviewed security footage from nearby businesses. What they found was troubling but offered no concrete leads. Sarah's car remained in the lot, undisturbed. Her belongings were inside her apartment, arranged as if she had simply stepped out. The absence of a struggle puzzled investigators. Sarah had been known for her punctuality and reliability, and her sudden disappearance triggered a surge of concern. Family members described her as responsible, caring, and ambitious, with dreams of attending graduate school in social work. Her parents, Tom and Linda Mitchell, were devastated. They combed through her personal effects, hoping to find a clue, a diary entry, a letter, anything that might explain her sudden absence, but there was nothing. The initial days turned into weeks, and the hope that Sarah had voluntarily left began to fade. Police turned their focus to potential suspects. Neighbors were questioned extensively. Coworkers were interviewed to reconstruct her last known movements. Sarah's last night had been ordinary. She attended a dinner with a close friend, returned home by 10:30 p.m., and had plans to start a new project at work the following morning. Surveillance from a nearby gas station confirmed her route home, showing no signs of anyone following her or unusual activity. The first significant break came when investigators found traces of blood in Sarah's apartment. Forensic teams collected samples from the kitchen and bathroom, but the technology at the time could not produce a definitive match. The blood was assumed to be Sarah's own, but without a known suspect, there was nothing further to analyze. Police files grew thick with notes, statements, and interviews, yet the trail ran cold. Over the years, investigators revisited the case, hoping new methods or overlooked details might emerge. The community followed the story closely. Residents of East Lansing were shaken by the disappearance. Vigil groups formed, neighborhood watch programs were intensified, and local media reported on tips and sightings that never materialized into solid leads. Sarah's family never gave up hope. They organized search parties, placed missing person posters throughout the city, and appeared on local news programs pleading for information. Every call, every tip, was meticulously recorded by the East Lansing Police Department, but none pointed directly to a suspect. The cold case file became one of the most frustrating and haunting in the department's history. In 2014, nearly 9 years after Sarah's disappearance, the Cold Case Unit was formed, equipped with new forensic capabilities and a mission to resolve long-standing mysteries. Detectives Susan Price and Michael Hart were assigned to Sarah's file. They began with a comprehensive review, re-interviewing witnesses, and meticulously re-examining evidence. What stood out immediately was the preserved blood sample from the 2005 investigation. Modern DNA technology had advanced exponentially, and the team sent the sample for analysis through the state laboratory's cold case DNA program. Weeks passed with anxious anticipation, and finally, the results came in. A match. The DNA did not belong to Sarah. It matched a man named Aaron Foley, a 29-year-old local resident with a criminal record for assault and burglary. He had lived near Sarah's apartment complex in 2005 and had been on the police radar for minor offenses, but was never connected to a violent crime. Investigators moved swiftly. Aaron Foley was brought in for questioning. His demeanor was calm, almost rehearsed, but when confronted with the DNA evidence, the cracks in his story began to show. He claimed to have had no contact with Sarah, insisting he had never entered her apartment or interacted with her. Detectives Price and Hart methodically presented the evidence, showing him the blood match. the timeline of his proximity to her residence, and witness statements from neighbors who remembered seeing him in the vicinity on the night of her disappearance. The pressure of the incontrovertible DNA evidence forced Foley into increasingly contradictory statements. While he initially denied everything, inconsistencies in his account, combined with the forensic evidence, left him isolated. The Cold Case Unit coordinated with the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office to prepare for formal charges. Foley's prior criminal behavior, his connection to the neighborhood, and the DNA match created a strong foundation for the prosecution. Meanwhile, Sarah's family, still wary after years of uncertainty, were informed of the breakthrough. The news was bittersweet. They were finally given hope for justice, but were reminded of the long years Sarah had been missing and the pain that had accompanied every unanswered question. Detectives revisited neighbors and acquaintances from 2005 to corroborate Foley's movements. Some remembered him loitering near the apartment complex. Others recalled odd behavior late at night, but no one had suspected him of such a horrific crime. The revelation of the DNA match transformed the case from a cold file into an active prosecution. Evidence was compiled meticulously, including the blood, minor fibers found in the apartment, and Foley's inconsistent statements. This collection would form the backbone of the trial. For nearly a decade, Sarah Mitchell's disappearance had remained one of Michigan's most troubling cold cases. The breakthrough in 2014 not only offered the promise of accountability, but also highlighted the importance of preserving evidence, the evolution of forensic technology, and the unwavering determination of detectives dedicated to bringing closure to victims' families. With Aaron Foley now the prime suspect, the investigation entered a critical stage. Detectives Susan Price and Michael Hart knew that the DNA match alone, while powerful, would not be enough to secure a conviction. They needed a full timeline of Foley's actions on the night Sarah disappeared and any potential witnesses who could corroborate her last movements. They began by revisiting the apartment complex where Sarah had lived. Neighbors were questioned again, this time with the benefit of nearly a decade of hindsight. Some recalled seeing Aaron's car parked near the building late at night, though at the time it had seemed innocuous. Others remembered unusual behavior, doors opened and closed, a figure walking the halls at odd hours, and quiet murmurs that went unnoticed at the time. Price and Hart meticulously reconstructed the environment of the 2005 crime. They noted that Sarah's apartment showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting that she had known or trusted her attacker enough to allow him inside. Foley had lived in the area and had been seen interacting casually with residents, giving him a level of familiarity that explained the lack of a struggle at the door. The detectives then focused on Foley himself, delving into his history. They discovered a pattern of controlling behavior in his previous relationships. Friends and acquaintances spoke of a man prone to manipulation, someone who became jealous quickly and had a tendency to intimidate others. These patterns, while not criminal in themselves, provided context for his actions and helped investigators understand the mind of the suspect. As the case files grew, the Cold Case Unit coordinated with forensic experts to re-examine items collected from Sarah's apartment in 2005. The team carefully analyzed fibers, fingerprints, and minute traces of DNA. Every scrap of evidence was cross-referenced with Foley's known belongings, clothing, and possessions. Each connection, no matter how small, strengthened the mounting case against him. Detectives also used digital records from the time. Although mobile phones and online activity were far less pervasive in 2005 than today, some early call records and credit card transactions offered insight into Foley's movements. These logs, when combined with eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence, painted a detailed picture of his actions before, during, and after Sarah's disappearance. Pressure on Foley increased as investigators began to prepare for his formal arrest. He was summoned to the station under the guise of a routine inquiry, but he was not yet aware that the DNA evidence had irrevocably linked him to Sarah's disappearance. During the initial questioning, Foley remained defensive, insisting he had never met Sarah in a context that would allow for any wrongdoing. Price and Hart watched his body language carefully. His evasive answers, coupled with subtle microexpressions of anxiety, suggested he was hiding something. Recognizing the opportunity to gain a confession or additional information, the detectives continued their strategy with patience. They did not rush, knowing that building trust, or at least breaking down his defenses, would be crucial. In the days that followed, investigators interviewed Foley's acquaintances from 2005. A former coworker remembered him speaking vaguely about Sarah, commenting on her appearance in ways that raised suspicion but had seemed innocuous at the time. Another neighbor recalled seeing Foley near the complex late one night, moving cautiously, carrying an object that had not been identified then, but now appeared suspicious in the context of the investigation. These accounts, while fragmented, added weight to the case. Detectives also sought out forensic experts to examine the preserved evidence under the latest techniques. Advances in DNA amplification and contamination prevention allowed them to confirm with 99.9% certainty that the blood sample recovered in 2005 belonged to Sarah and was directly linked to Foley. This confirmation was pivotal. It eliminated any reasonable doubt about the connection and provided the legal team with a strong foundation for prosecution. Meanwhile, the community followed the investigation closely. News outlets reported on the DNA breakthrough and the arrest of Foley as the suspect. Neighbors, friends, and family of Sarah watched with a mixture of hope and apprehension. For nearly a decade, the uncertainty had haunted them. Now, finally, there was a tangible path toward justice. The detectives faced a delicate situation with Foley's interactions with law enforcement. They needed to gather a confession or incriminating statements without violating his rights. Through careful questioning, they asked about his whereabouts on the night of Sarah's disappearance. Foley's statements were inconsistent, sometimes claiming to have been at home, sometimes offering vague excuses for being in the neighborhood. The contradictions, when cross-checked with evidence, highlighted his deceit. The breakthrough came when investigators presented him with the physical evidence, including the precise location of the blood and the DNA match. Foley's composure faltered. He attempted to minimize his involvement, claiming it was accidental or that he had merely been in proximity to Sarah, but the forensic facts were irrefutable. With mounting pressure, his story began to crumble, though he stopped short of a full confession. During this period, detectives also collaborated with the Ingham County Prosecutor's Office to assemble a comprehensive case file. They ensured that every detail was meticulously documented, from the initial disappearance in 2005 to the latest forensic revelations. Witness statements were organized chronologically, and all evidence was cataloged for presentation in court. This preparation was essential, as they anticipated a determined defense attorney who would attempt to challenge the credibility of the decade-old evidence. Sarah's family was kept informed throughout the process. Tom and Linda Mitchell were relieved to know that the person responsible had been identified, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on them. They recounted the years of uncertainty, the long nights wondering where their daughter was, and the emotional toll of living with unanswered questions. Support from friends, community members, and local advocacy groups helped sustain them as they prepared for the upcoming legal proceedings. As the investigation progressed, the detectives discovered additional minor evidence: fingerprints on objects within the apartment, fibers matching clothing associated with Foley, and traces of hair that forensic testing linked conclusively to him. Each piece reinforced the narrative constructed from the DNA match. Foley's prior criminal record, while not directly connected to violent crime, established a pattern of disregard for others, safety, and property. The Cold Case Unit also reached out to digital archives for local surveillance footage from nearby businesses. Although security cameras were less common in 2005, a few recordings were recovered. These showed Foley's vehicle in proximity to Sarah's apartment around the time she disappeared, corroborating witness accounts and further solidifying the timeline. By mid-2015, the legal team had compiled an airtight case. The combination of preserved evidence, modern DNA technology, witness recollections, and Foley's inconsistent statements provided a clear path to arrest and prosecution. Detectives Price and Hart met with the Mitchell family to prepare them for court testimony, ensuring they understood the proceedings and what to expect from both the prosecution and defense. The stage was set for the formal arrest and the beginning of legal proceedings that would finally bring closure to a case that had haunted East Lansing for a decade. The arrest of Aaron Foley sent shockwaves through East Lansing. On the morning of his arrest, the streets around his apartment were lined with local news crews and curious neighbors who had followed the case for years. Foley appeared calm, almost indifferent, as he was led away in handcuffs, but those who had known him described a subtle tension in his posture, a quiet acknowledgement that the past had finally caught up with him. Detectives Susan Price and Michael Hart were at the station, methodically preparing for the initial questioning. They knew that while the DNA evidence was conclusive, obtaining a confession or further details could solidify the prosecution's case and provide the Mitchell family with deeper answers. Foley's interview was tense. He initially denied any involvement in Sarah's disappearance, claiming that he barely remembered her and had no reason to harm her. Price remained patient, guiding the conversation toward the details of the night in question. Hart observed Foley's reactions carefully, noting micro-expressions that betrayed unease. As the detectives presented the evidence, including the DNA match and fingerprints found at Sarah's apartment, Foley's composure began to crumble. He fumbled for explanations, at first minimizing his presence in the building, then suggesting accidental contact. But the forensic proof was unyielding, and under sustained questioning, his denials became increasingly inconsistent. Foley eventually admitted to being inside Sarah's apartment that night but insisted the encounter was unintentional, a claim that did little to explain the blood and physical evidence linking him to the scene. The investigators recorded every statement, knowing that these inconsistencies would be critical during the trial. Meanwhile, the Mitchell family prepared for what had been decades in the making. Tom and Linda Mitchell met with their attorneys and the prosecuting team, reviewing evidence, timelines, and what to expect in court. The emotional weight was heavy. Each step brought back memories of their daughter's disappearance, yet each step also brought hope that justice was finally within reach. Community support played a pivotal role. Local advocacy groups and neighbors rallied behind the Mitchells, offering emotional support and keeping public attention focused on the case. Social media, though not as pervasive in 2005, now amplified awareness of Foley's arrest, and community members expressed relief that the long unsolved case had reached a turning point. As the case moved into the pretrial phase, investigators continued to uncover additional details. Old evidence that had been cataloged but not fully analyzed in 2005 was re-examined. Forensic labs applied the latest DNA amplification techniques to hair and fiber samples, confirming the connections to Foley. Fingerprints on objects in Sarah's apartment were matched definitively to him, strengthening the chain of evidence. The legal team worked closely with Price and Hart to ensure that every aspect of the case was ready for presentation. Witnesses were re-interviewed to refresh their memories, and statements were organized into a coherent timeline spanning the day Sarah vanished. The attention to detail was meticulous. Any oversight could have compromised the integrity of the case. Court proceedings began months later. Foley entered the courtroom, facing a jury who had been made aware of the case's long history. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence in clear, compelling terms, walking the jury through the timeline from Sarah's last known movements to the DNA match that ultimately identified Foley as the perpetrator. Witnesses, including neighbors and former coworkers, testified about Foley's behavior in 2005, providing context that aligned with the physical evidence. The defense attempted to challenge the reliability of decade-old evidence and questioned the accuracy of DNA testing. They argued that memories fade and contamination could have occurred, but the forensic experts countered with precise explanations of the methods used, emphasizing the chain of custody and technological advances that ensured accuracy. Cross-examinations revealed Foley's evasiveness and inconsistent statements, further undermining his credibility. The trial also examined Foley's motives. Investigators and prosecutors detailed his history of controlling behavior, his presence near Sarah's apartment, and patterns of manipulation observed by those who knew him. While the crime itself had taken place years earlier, the behavioral analysis helped the jury understand the dynamics that led to Sarah's disappearance and the subsequent concealment of the truth. After several days of testimony, the jury deliberated. The weight of the evidence, DNA, fingerprints, witness accounts, and Foley's own statements was compelling. When the verdict was finally read, it brought a mix of relief and closure to everyone involved, guilty on all counts. For the Mitchell family, the moment was emotional beyond words. Tears flowed freely as they embraced, the years of uncertainty finally replaced by a sense of justice and the possibility of healing. The impact of the case rippled through the community. Neighbors expressed gratitude to the cold case unit for their dedication and persistence. Local law enforcement emphasized the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining vigilance, even decades after a crime. The success of modern forensic methods, particularly DNA testing, reinforced confidence in the ability to resolve cold cases. In the aftermath, Sarah's family worked to commemorate her life. They organized community events to raise awareness about missing persons, spoke publicly about the emotional challenges of unresolved cases, and partnered with advocacy groups to support other families in similar situations. Their efforts highlighted the broader significance of the case, that persistence, scientific advancements, and careful investigation can ultimately bring long-delayed justice. Foley was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, ensuring that he would no longer pose a threat to anyone else. The court emphasized the meticulous work of the investigators and the resilience of Sarah's family in the face of nearly a decade of uncertainty. The closure of this case provided not only legal justice, but also emotional restitution, allowing the community to move forward while honoring Sarah's memory. Detectives Price and Hart reflected on the case as a milestone in their careers. The combination of cold case persistence, modern DNA technology, and detailed investigative work had achieved what once seemed impossible. Their commitment demonstrated that even years later, truth and justice could prevail. For East Lansing, the resolution of Sarah Mitchell's case marked the end of a painful chapter and the beginning of healing. The once unanswered questions had been replaced by clarity, the community's fears alleviated, and a family's anguish addressed. It stood as a reminder that time may pass, but determination, science, and the pursuit of justice are enduring, capable of resolving even the most elusive mysteries.